What's happening, everybody? Welcome back to another week of Striper Migration Reports from On the Water. My name is Matt Haeffner. I'm the assistant editor at On the Water magazine. And if you're just joining us, we've just passed the halfway mark in our spring striper migration video report series. However, there's still plenty of migrating to be done on the stripers' behalf. We've got more trophy stripers from the Chesapeake pulling up off the coast of New Jersey this week, where new personal bests are being caught on live eels and deep diving metal lips. Over the next week, we're likely going to see some of those fish from the Hudson River beginning to drop out of New York Harbor to make their way up the coast. Meanwhile, we've got schoolies in Maine, slot class fish filing into the waters around Boston, and more waves of stripers in the 40-inch class arriving in southern New England by the day, where they're feeding on squid, bunker, herring, and much more. And even though the cows are coming home for anglers in New Jersey and on Long Island, we're going to be checking in on the striper migration in different portions of southern New England with the help of a couple familiar faces. Okay, so our first guest this week is the owner and an active fishing guide at Rhode Island Kayak Fishing Adventures. He's also a friend of On the Waters. Please welcome Dustin Stevens. Dustin, how's it going, man?
Good. How you doing, Matt?
I'm good, man. You and I were just catching up on, week fish and stuff like that, but we haven't really seen each other since, what it was at the Rissa show, probably back in March.
Yep. Yep.
Yep. But I talked with Peter at the Rissa show, Peter Jenkins, and we had him on as well a couple weeks ago. So I figured it was a good time to check back in on Rhode Island. April 26th, I think, was when Peter was on our striper migration reports, which was just prior to the squid showing up. So what has changed in terms of the forage base and the average size class of stripers around Rhode Island in the 3 weeks since then?
As far as size goes, back then that was more schoolies. I think mid-April is when I got the first confirmed report of like the fresh migratory fish showing up.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess by the time you talked to him by the 26th, it was more of schoolies and slot fish.
Yeah.
Shortly after, like up until now, you're seeing a lot of like schoolie slot and slightly over slot size fish. Um, and then a few days ago, I know a couple guys that have gotten over 40-inch fish. So um, we are seeing some bigger ones show up, but
Mm-hmm.
the bite is kind of spread out. Last year's spots aren't necessarily this year's spots, so it's just really finding a solid base for where those bigger fish are.
Yeah, trying to put together a pattern of some sort. So I'm curious, do you spend a lot of your time out front, like off the ocean beaches, or do you kind of start up in Narragansett Bay and stuff like that?
Normally, the first like West Wall area is an area that the fresh migratory fish pop up first.
Mm.
We were talking before the call that I dedicated most of my April to blackfish, um, but I didn't really go out there to chase that. I didn't feel that I had to be like the first one to get the first
Yeah.
migratory fish, so it was kind of more of a lazy approach. I want them to come up to me where I live, like within 10 to 20 minutes from a couple solid places in the upper bay, whether it be Providence River or Greenwich Bay area. um, so it's just kind of playing that waiting game, but the
Yeah.
bite has been so spread out. The East Bay has been pretty solid as far as consistency goes. So
And I'm curious because one of the things that Peter mentioned when we had him on was the Calamari Causeway, and I
yep.
think that's in, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's on the eastern side of the bay. So, a couple weeks back, I saw a photo of you on Instagram with a couple, a nice bucket of squid from your night mission out on the bay, which I
Yep.
was definitely very jealous of. And we know, how big of a role do squid play in Rhode Island, and what type of areas do you typically find them stripers feeding on them?
They usually show up late April, early May, and the bass are a lot of the bass are already here, and they're a bigger class of fish are right behind them. Usually, like Jamestown and Newport are like the squid hotspots. Like Peter
Mhm.
mentioned, the calamari
Yeah.
causeway down in
Yeah.
Newport. Uh, but yeah, I was togging, what was it, 2 days ago, and there was just this epic feed, and it looked like the birds were picking at the squid that were like high up in the water column. So they were, obviously the bass were pretty finicky, but yeah, they're definitely feeding on the squid right now.
So I'm curious because on Cape Cod we have, when the bass are on squid, they're out in the rips, but I don't know if and that's generally reserved to, the south side of Cape Cod. So is that, I mean, you guys have a lot of rocky structure in Narragansett Bay. So how does that come into play when like targeting, certain areas to find squid?
Well, any of the like squid hotspots, like I said, Newport Harbor area, the bridges, Newport, Jamestown. That area is typically where I would go for squid. I know on the Sakonnet side, guys do really well over there too, and also Point Judith. But I usually, see the most squid activity and attempt for squid in either Newport or Jamestown. Um, and usually after the first big wave of squid show up, then that's when you'll get the fish feeding on squid, and some guys that are chunking from shore are using squid on their dropper rigs or whatever, and getting
Yeah.
some decent results.
And so around those areas, for people who maybe aren't familiar with Newport and whatnot, you have a lot of current, like a ton of current coming out of the bay or into the bay.
Absolutely, yeah. Between like the bridges and Peter's Calamari Causeway, like that's tons of current going in there, in and out of there. But the squid, they just kind of seem to just stick around for the most part. Like when I was squidding, I just happened to find a school and just
Yeah.
sat there for a little while, and
Yeah.
was
Pick
able to
away
get
at them.
a decent bucket.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than the ones we've been seeing down here. I think it's recently picked up on the south side of Cape. I know there's some boats getting them now, but Jimmy and I went out a couple weeks ago just from shore, and we didn't find anything under any of the lights. So that was a little unfortunate to find that. But yeah, I mean, you got a good mix of squid there. And so I'm curious, and since we're talking about squid, when you're on a guided kayak trip and the bass are chasing the squid, what are some of your favorite lures to throw or give to clients to throw at stripers? And what type of like rod and reel outfit do you generally equip them with?
I've squid around like the other day. We just threw a small paddle tail, so not necessarily this color, but I usually do like pink or white,
Yeah.
something natural. And this is just like a 4 inch gravity tackle paddle tail. So yeah, those are kind of the squid mimicking colors
Yeah.
that I'll give. And as far as outfit, usually like a 7 foot medium heavy, either jigging world or Nexus. We've lost a few Nexuses over the years, so dialed it back to some ugly sticks.
Yeah.
But yeah, something with like a 3 or 4,000 size reel. The Daiwa BGs, the Stratix. That's usually what I use for the most part.
Yeah, I know Albie snacks are a really popular one too, especially around
Absolutely,
here out in the rips. Those pink Albie snacks or the amber ones, they just absolutely crush.
absolutely.
So once the squid kind of trickle out, and which it may not happen for a while, like you said, they tend to stick around for quite some time. But what is the next big event or bite that you look forward to in Rhode Island, and or is that generally the time of the season that you start to see bass kind of shift towards being more structure oriented?
It's all about the bunker. Usually after the big push of squid, then that's what we wait for. I
Mhm.
haven't ran into any schools of them yet. I was marking a lot of bait today when I was out. I threw my snag hook out into whatever I was marking, came up empty. But yeah, after the whole squid bite, which is usually more, I guess, out front up to like mid bay area.
Okay.
I'm just waiting for the bunker to push like really far up the bay. And that's kind of one of my favorite ways to catch them, just snagging, live lining, and just watching the massacre happen,
Oh
when they
yeah.
just come up and demolish the bunker. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of fun for me personally, and some clients that I've taken out that haven't experienced it. It's a lot of fun for them to do for the first time.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, the thought of like a 40-inch bass on a live bunker just freaking out on the end of like the setups you're talking about, especially on a 7 foot rod and 3 or 4K reel. That's a blast.
For sure.
Well, so
But
Dustin, one of the other things I wanted to ask you is because we always do this with our guests. If you could give kayak anglers in particular one piece of parting advice for striper fishing this week, what would it be?
be open-minded to launching more than one time, which isn't something that I've done a lot in the past, but this year, just hopping around to different spots. The don't necessarily wait for blitzes or whatever. Carry a few different presentations. Tube and worm is starting to pick up. I'm just now starting to use that. Like most of my stripers this year have been on like SP minnow, tried and true, bone
Yeah.
white, gravity tackle, paddle tails have been killing it for me. And then now, like the top water bite is starting to be there because you're launching and seeing fish swirling or crashing on bait. So I would definitely carry those in the tackle box. But yeah, just be ready to cover water. Troll a lot. Always have a line in the water, which is something that I do every time that I launch, unless I see activity in the distance or
Right.
whatever. But yeah, just be open minded. Don't go too crazy with tackle. You know, some type of hard plastic minnow, soft plastic, tube, top water, and flutter spoon. That's something that's been pretty hot for a lot of guys.
Totally. Jimmy and Anthony DeCicci were just out there last week with Rob Taylor, and they were
Oh
hammering
yeah,
bass on flutter spoons. And I think Chris and Kevin went out with Rob the next day because they
yeah,
were jealous.
for sure. It's like, hey Rob, yeah, but yeah, that was killer. The kayak guys are not we're not getting that action consistently, but yeah, it's just different reports. It's kind of funny. It's different reports with like the small network of kayak anglers that I talk to versus like the boat anglers,
Right.
who just go out of wherever they're going from and just burn fuel, and they end up finding a bite. Um, on the kayak side, you just launch and hope that they're there based on
Yeah,
all
you got
the
a little shorter range. Yeah.
way shorter range.
Yeah.
Way
I mean,
shorter
they
range.
still move pretty good. Like those pedal kayaks are great. And if you, I don't know if you have any motors on any of them, but yeah, I mean, you can still cover a fair amount of water. And when you're trying to, hop from spot to spot, that's to your
Right.
point. That's why trolling is such a great thing to do.
Yeah, spots have changed. I always say, find a spot within a spot. Just because last year and the year before, if you always launched in early May and you went this way, and the fish were there, this year it might be a little bit different. So
Right.
I just got to be open minded and be willing to cover a lot of water, which I always do. And feel bad for some clients because I put them through the ringer with pedaling all around or whatever.
Yeah,
But
get a little bit of a quad workout in for sure.
for sure. But yeah, as the bite is solid. It's just kind of inconsistent. I think the spring run is similar to the fall run where the fish are more on bait. So it just may not be in that particular area on that day. But if you get on a hot bite, it's incredible.
And so I'm glad. Last thing you touched on real quick was the flutter spoons, and when you mentioned that the bunker come up after the squid, and that's like the next big bite you're looking forward to. I would imagine flutter spoons become one of the main things you're using for your charters and whatnot.
First, if a person hadn't done it before, just doing it from a kayak sometimes is not the easiest thing to teach, depending on the
Right.
experience level. So that's one of the last few things that I grab. But if
Okay.
you're just marking like crazy, and you know, and the fish are just kind of hitting anything, then I feel that during a hot bite, that's kind of the time to take advantage of something that you may not have used before, kind of get familiar with that.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Maybe
yeah,
pull some bigger fish out of the school.
for sure. Yeah, I think I would, jig like a plastic. I would give a client a plastic to jig before the spoon, just because I've tried it a lot before, and we've had a very few like great flutter spoon trips in the past. But like, so if you're jigging from the bottom, something like a nice size paddle tail, that'll usually do the trick.
Yeah, I mean, if you're new to kayak fishing too, it can be like you said, it can be a lot to just learn, and also kind of risky having those treble hooks swinging around on a flutter like a 7 to 9 inch flutter spoon. Whereas something like a swim shad, you get the one hook, a lot
For sure,
safer handling and whatnot for somebody who might be new to it. So,
for sure.
well, Dustin, this has been great, man. I appreciate the insight you gave on the forage base and what's changed, and how it will continue to change as we move through the rest of the spring migration. And best of luck to you and anybody who's taking trips for the rest of the spring.
I appreciate that, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
All right, take care. All right, big thanks to Dustin Stevens of Rhode Island Kayak Fishing Adventures for joining us this week to discuss the current state of the striper migration in Rhode Island. Like Dustin said, this spring striper season has been a little different than the spring migrations of recent memory, but he made some great points about how to put together a bite within the limited range that a kayak allows. Whether it's trying spots that haven't been productive in years past, trolling between locations to keep a line in the water, or simply exploring new areas in search of potential. If you're out on the hunt for stripers by kayak or shore in Rhode Island, keep an eye out for birds and signs of squid, and target areas of heavy current during the low light hours of the day to find stripers taking advantage of that fast moving water and hard, rocky structure that Rhode Island is so well known for. Our next guest this week is a well known charter captain in Connecticut, and he's been there for some of the largest striped bass to have ever been caught on camera during on the water's angling adventures. Please welcome Captain Joe Diorio. All right, everybody. So we've got Captain Joe Diorio of Diorio Guide Service in Connecticut here. We're going to talk a little bit about the way the striper fishing is looking right now in Connecticut. So, Joe, how you been, man?
I'm doing good. How about you?
All right, can't complain. The fishing's really kind of taken off now. Now that we're in the second half of May, so everything's
Yeah.
on the up and up, man.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been really good actually late. It's probably been one of the best springs in a long time.
Oh, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. I
Yeah.
know there's some concerns on other parts of the coast because the lack of bunker and things like that are kind of just it's been an uncharacteristic spring compared to the past 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
But now that we're halfway through May, and this is kind of right around the time that the striper fishing tends to blow wide open in Connecticut with larger fish showing up. I know you started your season about a week ago, so can you fill me in on the class of fish that you're seeing currently in your area of like Eastern Connecticut?
Yeah. Yeah. As far as like the fish class, we're getting a lot of fish between the 24 and like 32-inch range. And then we're getting a few each trip. I would say like 3 or 4 each trip between, I don't know, 36 and 39 inches. And then we usually get one a trip over 42 to 46 inches. The biggest fish so far this year has been 46. We caught it last Thursday. I dropped a 45-incher yesterday. Today I saw a bunch of big fish, and there's definitely it's and what's crazy is every single fish that we're catching is fat, like really, really fat. And I think they're all just feeding on those herring. And it's been a good spring actually. We're averaging anywhere between like 15 to 30 fish an outing. So it's been pretty good so far.
Yeah, man, that's great. And how long do your charters typically last? I mean, 30 fish or so is pretty solid.
Between 5 and 7 hours. I think I've
Okay.
only done one 7 hour trip. Today my clients canceled because they were scared of the rain and the weather. But I think I probably did like 25 fish. I couldn't stay home and do nothing. So I went out
Yeah,
fishing for
right.
myself. We did probably like 25 fish.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is because we actually talked to Matt Stone from Black All Outfitters a couple weeks back. And at that time, there was still a fair amount of fish chasing herring up in the rivers. And now it seems like the bite is kind of transitioning to some of the sound facing beaches and stuff. So, in your experience, what are some of the driving factors that prompt them to move toward lower portions of the rivers and then eventually out front?
Um, obviously bait is huge. I'm still seeing a ton of herring. I think maybe saw bunker last week, like last Friday, but it was nothing substantial. It was probably a holdover bunker than more than anything. What drops the fish down is actually, I think we have a very large spawning population here in Connecticut, even though it's not really talked about that much.
Right.
I still think a lot of those fish are spawning up north. But once they're done spawning, they got to come back down into the sound. That drives a lot of those fish out. A lot of the fish that we're catching right now, I should say all the fish that we're catching right now are holdovers. Um,
Okay.
so either they're getting ready to still go up north and spawn, or they're just not. They don't want to spawn this year, and they're just down there getting fat and eating every single herring that comes into the river. We're still seeing a lot of shad coming into the river as well.
Oh, wow.
The
Okay.
shad run's been pretty good this year, but from all reports that I've seen, herring's been really, really good. I can tell you, I can see them getting blasted out of the water when I'm fishing. So I think that the main thing why we're getting them down in the lower river is just because of bait.
Totally. It's interesting too that you mentioned that the spawning populations in Connecticut. Do you think that they kind of they're picky like that? They'll spawn certain years and then other years they kind of don't seem to do much of any of that?
I have no clue. I have no clue. I wish I had a better answer. Um, it's crazy. Back when I used to keep fish, about 10, 15 years ago, you catch them on the reef and their eggs would be green. And they had eggs and they just never spawned them.
Interesting.
I don't know what the, reason is behind that, but I do know we do have a lot of spawning fish here in the Connecticut River, up of, you know, basically from Cromwell all the way up to Holyoke, Massachusetts. There's a really good spawning areas. You have the tributaries like the Farmington, the Salmon River. That there is pretty good spawning populations. Last week when I was actually fishing for shad, I caught two small stripers right around like 6 to 8 inches.
Oh, wow.
So they're definitely spawning. There's fish around. There's definitely spawning populations here. I don't know why some fish don't or why some fish do. Probably a better question for the biologist. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
that
for
smart. I
scientists.
just catch them. I just catch them. I'm not that smart enough to figure that out.
All right, cool. We won't get too deep into the science aspect of it then. No worries. Well, I mean, you mentioned the Connecticut River, and a couple of years back, you had Chris Megan on for an episode of On the Water's Angling Adventures, and you guys caught some very, very big bass on topwater near the mouth of the Connecticut, which after
Yeah.
excessive rain, it's pouring right here in Cape Cod right now. I don't know about where you guys are. I think you mentioned it was raining and you had clients cancel on you today, but we know the Connecticut River, after excessive rains in New England, tends to, get really muddied up. So how do you approach the striper fishing around the river mouths, and what water or weather conditions do you find most conducive to good bass fishing in those areas?
To be honest, like I love rainy conditions. I love windy conditions. You know, the Connecticut River, you're lucky to have like 1.5 2 feet of visibility at any moment. Okay. So, rattles, baits with some type of large rattle inside of them usually work best. The Joe Bag skipper. This year I've been using the new one, the 7-inch that just came out. Well, it's 6.75. And it's got a great little rattle inside of it. And that's probably been doing 80% of our damage. So when it's muddied up conditions, cotton cordell, pencil poppers, docks, spooks, something with a large rattle inside of them. Then as the water usually clears up, that's when, still those spooks tend to work really, really well. Like I said, it's pretty much always dirty here. But as the water does tend to, clear up a little bit, I'll start throwing some plastics like 9-inch sluggos. If when the bigger fish are around, and the 9-inch sluggos, I'm throwing weightless. And as bigger fish come in, I'll start throwing weightless like 14.5-inch, Joe Bag eels. And they slurp them right up. I usually don't throw anything under 9 inches, and the reason why is because I don't want to catch small fish. I just want to catch the big ones, and that's what I want to do, and that's what my clients come to me for. So as far as like other baits that I use, we'll use red fins. We will use paddle tails every once in a while, but usually it's when the water is a lot clearer. The color white is a great color. Pink is a great color during the dirty water, when the water's dirty. Today, the water really wasn't that dirty yet. So I was catching fish on Joe Bag's, the 7-inch skipper. And then we were also catching them on the 9-inch sluggo. And it was a great bite. Like I said, it's been really, really good.
And so the dirtier water, it seems that like something with a loud knocking rattle is super crucial. Whereas when you have the clearer water conditions, you're using soft plastics that still elicit the strikes based on that S walking action, like that walk the dog sort of pattern.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you a brief story. About 15 years ago, I had a buddy come on board, and I was using these fancy plugs, like $50 plugs, gliders, pencil poppers, and that kind of stuff. And, I'd catch a fish, once compared to his every 10 fish. He was completely out fishing me, and he was using a cotton cordell pencil popper. And I go, "What the heck are you doing? Or what are you using?" And it was that rattle. It was the same thing with the docks. I had a lot of people give me, wooden spooks that didn't have any type of rattle inside of them. And then you'd be twitching them, twitch. You get follows, but they wouldn't commit to it. And the second you threw out that dock or the skipper, bam, they would absolutely smash it. I think that noise here in Connecticut versus a lot of other areas, it's kind of crazy. You go down to Jersey, that there's a big metal lip bite down there. Always. Oh, yeah. They love their metal lips. I will not toss a metal lip. I hate metal lips. They just don't work. They swim beautiful. They look beautiful. But for some reason, I can't catch a fish on a metal lip. My clients can't catch a fish on a metal lip. Until they figure out how to make a plastic one with a big rattle in it. They're almost useless inside the Connecticut River.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's a totally different environment. I mean, you're fishing over like shallow sandy flats that are maybe 3 feet deep at times. And the guys down in Jersey, when they're using these metal lips, which is actually, it's going on right now. They've got those big Chesapeake fish pulling up off North Jersey, and they're using metal lips that dive to like 10 feet. So, I mean, you're talking about digging up some sand flats if you want to throw those there.
I had a guy send me a metal lip the other day, actually. And like I said, it's a beautiful plug. I absolutely love it. It's going to work. It's going to work when I go outside into the sound.
Yeah.
And I'm throwing it, and I'm keeping my rod tip as high as I can to make sure it's not digging on the ground. My clients was catching like 30, he caught like 10, 15 fish in like, I don't know, an hour. And I'm chucking that metal lip, and I didn't get a bite, didn't get a follow, didn't get anything. It's just something about that rattle, something about that sound that really, really pisses these fish off and gets them to actually eat.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you also mentioned that, you might throw it a little more when you move out into the sound, into some of that deeper water. So as we head into June and larger fish from the Chesapeake, the Delaware, and even the Hudson, because they're going to start to drop out any day now, they start to migrate through the Sound. Like, what areas do you tend to find those 40 and 50-pound class fish? And, does your approach or technique change much from the way you're fishing now?
So right now we're fishing the rivers, and we are fishing the reefs. There are some times that we go out to the race, to the gut and stuff like that, and we'll fish out there. There's a lot of fish actually out there right now. It all depends where we're fishing. They'll be fishing the river all the way till mid-July.
Okay.
I'm not going to usually waste the gas to go out and try to get fish different areas when they're right yard 5 minutes away. But that being said, when we are fishing the other areas and they do come out of the river, we're fishing rocky points, we're fishing reefs. And the best way I like to fish like a deeper body of water is three-way. I did a TV show with Uncle Chris in Block Island.
Yeah.
We were three-weighing eels and we were casting large soft plastics and stuff like that. And that works, that translates very, very well here locally as well. So three-weighing eels, three-weighing bunker, scup, porgies and stuff like that. Even sea robins. That's one of my favorite baits to ever use. To be completely honest, I love sea robins. Like I said, going back to when a long time ago, about 15 years ago, I used to kill fish. I used to kill a lot of the stripers. Now we're 100% catch and release. But whenever I would go, we got a striper, we open it up, there would always be sea robins inside of these fish, especially inside the Long Island Sound. And I was like, man, I got to try a sea robin. And I'll tell you what, they work phenomenal for catching really big bass. So three-weighing anything, that's obviously of legal size. And that's the other good thing about sea robins. Porgies has got to be over a specific limit in size, and you got to use them bigger than what that size limit is. There ain't no limit on sea robins. So you can use the ones that are about this big, and they get snatched up really, really quickly. So yeah, and then when we're fishing, against the shoreline, I'm using a lot of spooks still. We're using the skipper, we're using the docks, we're using soft plastics, weightless, and on a jig head. The biggest thing is finding that when you're using a jig head, that you're not getting stuck on the bottom and you're just not hitting the bottom over and over and over again. Right. You want to be anywhere from like 6 inches to 2.5, 3 feet off the bottom, and then that way you're in the strike zone. These fish are hiding usually right behind rocks and large boulders to stay out of that heavy current, and then ambushing baits as they go by. And it's basically the same idea when they're on the reefs. You start at the head of the reef, you go up the hill, and then you go back down the hill. Usually the two spots that you're going to get hit is right at the very, very top or on the backside of that hump. And that's usually when you get those fish.
Yeah, and I know I've fished the race a couple times and Plum Gut as well, and out there we're usually three-way and bucktails, and they say the same thing. Yep. It's like take 5 cranks or so, depending on the speed of the current. Obviously, it's 2 to 5 cranks off the bottom, and you're fishing mainly as you go up that ledge. It depends on what the tide's doing too. Yep. Obviously, if it's outgoing, you're fishing down the ledge, but yeah, the strikes come on the way up the ledge or on the way down the ledge, like right towards the top. Yep.
Yeah, the race is an interesting area. You don't want to go into the rip, so you're usually not fishing on the backside of that hump. You know what I mean? Usually the rip's like 5 feet tall or 4 feet tall, and you're going to get tossed around and thrown around. It's not very comfortable for myself nor my clients. But usually when we're fishing it right now, actually we're fishing, we're three-weighing gill bag sand eels. Yeah, we're dropping them down on a three-way, hitting the bottom, taking a crank up, and we're just following that contour line. So if it goes up 5 feet, we take 2 cranks, or a crank and a half, 2 cranks. We're also using diamond jigs, and we caught a couple on a flutter spoon already as well too. So that's been a really cool bite as well.
Yeah, that's great. John Skinner was on here a couple of weeks ago. He's talking about how he, right around this time, he'll start shifting his focus to flutter spoons and the rips and stuff, and he loves that. I mean, for a long time it was just three-way and bucktails. And now with these flutter spoons that get down so fast, it's like all you need is that moving water to give it the action. So it's a bang up job out there.
No, yeah, they work. The flutter spoons, believe it or not, actually work pretty much everywhere I've used them. I've used them out of block. I've used them inside the Sound, inside the rivers. On the out at the gut, out at the race. As long as it's able to go straight up and down and you're not getting too much scope out, usually we're catching fish. And honestly, the trolling motor helps out with that, the scope as well, big time.
Oh, 100%, especially in a place like the race where you want to be able to control the speed of your drift for sure.
For sure.
And so, Joe, the last thing I wanted to ask you, because I ask all of our guests, is if you could give, striped bass anglers in Connecticut one piece of parting advice this week, what would it be?
Get out and fish.
Yeah,
You ain't gonna catch them sitting on the couch.
exactly.
No, like I said, just these fish are trying to warm up their bodies. The water's still a little cold, so fish areas that are going to warm up a lot quicker. Then don't be fishing deep water. Don't fish shallow, fish mud flats, fish rocks. You know, it's different when I say don't fish deep water. Obviously, the race and the gut are two places that are very, very deep, but there's a lot of bait out there. Find the bait, find fish. And that goes inside these rivers too. If there's bait, fish the mouths of the rivers, the little tributaries that come off of it. And you'll get on fish. You'll eventually get on fish. Once you find them, they'll eat. They're going to eat, and don't be afraid to change your bait. Don't be afraid to change your tactics. I see a lot of guys still throwing 9-inch plugs. You're going to get swirls, you're going to get hits, you're going to get follows, but you're not going to catch them as much as a 7-inch plug. These next few weeks, those smaller baits are really, really, you're fishing, you're trying to imitate a herring, or you're trying to imitate a sandy when you're fishing out in the race or something like that. You're imitating sand eels, you're imitating butterfish, you're imitating squid. So, you try to match the hatch. The biggest thing is just matching the hatch, and you'll get on these fish. You will definitely get on these fish. There's a lot of them around. We have a really good population of fish here right now, and I'm not hearing that in other areas. I have some buddies that are calling me like, you getting them, and they're like, we're struggling. So there are definitely some gaps within the fishery, but we're pretty fortunate enough to have a really, really good fishery right now.
Absolutely. And I mean, like you said, it sounds like a lot of these fish, especially in the Connecticut River and, some areas of Eastern Connecticut are resident fish. So, once you get those big migrators moving through, you're coming around the east end of Long Island and stuff, they're going to set up shop in the Long Island Sound for the summer, and a lot of those places like Block and the Race and whatnot. So hopefully you have a great season ahead of you, man.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And, one thing I also want to mention is we talk about the fish population a little bit, and we want to make sure that everybody's taking good care of these fish, getting them back into the water as quickly as possible, hold them in the right areas, not hanging them upside down or anything like that. And just doing your best to really, really, ensure the population of these fish, not only for us, but for our future fishermen as well.
Exactly. That's a great way to end it, man. I appreciate your insight, Joe. And thanks for jumping on and taking the time out of your day, and hope you have a great rest of your spring season.
I appreciate you giving me an invite to come on here and talk.
Absolutely, Joe. All right, man. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks again, Matt. We'll see you.
All right, bye. Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this week. Thanks again to our guest, Dustin Stevens of Rhode Island Kayak Fishing Adventures, and Joe Diorio of Diorio Guide Service in Connecticut for joining us to discuss the striper migration across southern New England. It's getting to be big fish season. Stripers in the 50-pound class recently arrived from the Chesapeake off the coast of New Jersey, where they're taking eels and deep diving metal lips. And over the next couple weeks, we'll start to see larger fish dropping out of the Hudson River. And when they do, they'll begin their push up the coast along with some of the larger bass that are currently stationed just south of the New York Bight. Areas like Newport and Narragansett Bay are seeing good fishing for stripers in the 40-inch class and over, where they're feeding on bunker and squid. Meanwhile, anglers fishing the rivers in central and eastern Connecticut are enjoying a robust holdover fishery with fish well over 40 inches that are chasing herring and schools of resident bunker. In the weeks to come, we can expect to see those fish that are currently off of the coast of Jersey and in the Hudson, rounding the tip of Long Island to set up in the rips or to continue their journey north. Plus, now that we've got schoolies and just under slots trickling into Maine, the north and south shores of Massachusetts are alive and well. They're seeing good fishing for slot class fish and even some fish in the 40-inch range. So it's only a matter of time until some big breeders from the Chesapeake start to push into southern New England. But before the big fish get to you, be sure to sign up for On the Water Striper Cup. Our 20-week catch and release-based striper fishing tournament is off and running, and members of the cup are already winning prizes from Yeti, Penn, Bubba, Costa Sunglasses, and a new edition, Turtle Box Audio. Plus, we have a Rapala Lures photo contest running until May 31st on the Striper Cup Instagram page. To be eligible to win prizes from Yeti, all you have to do is catch and photograph any fish that was caught on a Rapala lure, post it on your Instagram page, and tag Striper Cup and Rapala USA, and you're entered to win. And remember what Joe Diorio said, you can't catch them from the couch. So get out there, enjoy some time on the water this week, and try to win some prizes just for catching and releasing striped bass. Best of luck out there. Thank you all for watching, and be sure to tune in again next week for another Striper Migration Report from On the Water.